I remember that. First time I heard it, we went to the dedication of the Apollo 13 spacecraft, and they were playing that in the background. And I think it was dedicated to the original 7 wives of the astronauts. Great song, I love it dearly. Vancy's passing you out something I wrote up to do with freedom from fear, and I'm going to cover that subject. Did any of you see Charlie Brown this morning in the newspaper? Well, you know, Charlie Brown, you can either look at him one way as the eternal optimist or the eternal failure. It depends on how you look at it. He has a tendency during the football season to Lucy will come up to him and with a football and say, "Charlie, would you kick the football? I'll hold it, you kick it." For as long as I can remember, which is a long time, Charlie would always say, "No, I know what you're going to do. You're going to pull it out, and I'm going to fall." Well, this year, same thing. Charlie says, "No, I'm not going to do it this year." Well, of course, there at the end of the cartoon, Charlie's getting back to take a run at it. Sure enough, he whiffs at it. She pulls the ball, and he falls flat on his back, and she just shrugs it off. And I think how many times, you know, most of the time you talk about Charlie Brown, you talk about a kind of a negative kind of a guy. But you know, anybody that do that for over a lot of years, he must have a lot of chutzpah to say, "Well, this may be the time." And every time I read it, what's funny is I think, this is going to be the year they're going to fool us all. Hasn't happened yet. So you're the eternal optimist. But also Charlie Brown, you know, our country is right now in the throes of what John F. Kennedy says was we're stuck with fear. We are so overwhelmed as a nation with fear. And all of us somehow get caught up in it. If you listen to your presidential debates, or you listen to the commentators on the presidential debates, what you will hear is a system. If we don't do this, the terrorists are going to eat up. If we don't do this, somebody else is going to eat up. We're running out of money in Social Security. Well, you know, most people have a tendency to believe those things because they're pounded at us day after day after day. Well, Charlie Brown was made into a stage play in New York City. And one of the lines on his stage play was, he was sitting, he was telling Lucy, he says, "You know, I figured out how to live life." And she's, "Well, what is that, Charlie Brown?" He says, "I know now just to take fear one day at a time." That's a great way to do it. Take it one day at a time. Don't worry about tomorrow, you have to just take today. That's a good idea. And then he's sitting in another part of it and he's having lunch. And he's sitting all by himself. And he says, "You know, lunch is probably the worst time in my life." He says, "Nobody will sit with me and I worry about these things." And then he gets to things. He says, "Well, no, maybe morning's the worst time in my life." He says, I lay in bed and I wonder, Charlie, if you don't get up, do you think anybody would miss you? You think anybody would care to come and look for you? And then he said, "Well, no." He says, "Nighttime's not too good either." He says, "I lay in bed, I think about all the stupid things I did during the day, wondering what people will think, wondering how life is." And he said, "Maybe nighttime's the worst part of the day." And he reaches into his sack and he pulls out his sandwich and he opens it and it's a peanut butter sandwich. And he says to himself, "Well," he says, "you know, people who eat peanut butter sandwiches are lonely and fearful." So he bites into the peanut butter sandwich and his last words are, "Well, you know, psychiatrists tell us about this." And he says, "Besides that, if you're really fearful, peanut butter sticks to the roof of your mouth." So you see, these are the types of things we look into. We look into so much fear thrown at us. I look at the world today, I look at, and not putting Long Beach down or anything, but we're so fearful in the city of Long Beach that we're going to grow. Heaven forbid that we have an airport that brings in millions of dollars. Heaven to Betsy that Disneyland builds something here because it's going to bring all this nasty traffic and ruin the environment. what's interesting? All that stuff can be taken care of. The environment, jet engines now are cleaner than they've ever been, quieter than they've ever been. Enough people complain about things, things get done. You don't need to be afraid of anything. What you're afraid of is how it's going to affect you. We don't want prisons built anywhere near us. We don't want homes for the handicapped put anywhere. Oh yeah, I want 1 million of them, but don't put them in my neighborhood type thing. That's fear. That's fear. You've got to know within you, as Larry said this morning, and I love that, Jill, on that, what is it? I wish you just enough. See, I wish you just enough. What's that mean? Well, the first line says, enough to get by happily. Well, some people, it takes a 300-foot yacht and $1 billion. You can have all that stuff probably. But I always have trouble with that, and I shouldn't, because I've been in this philosophy long enough to know there is no limitation. But what I do know from my own experience is some of us aren't as driven as other people. Now, I don't mean anybody should help me or anything, but going to school, I could study 8 hours a day on mathematics and still get a C. I could do no study at all and still get a C. So what do you think I did? I took the hard way out. I didn't do anything. But the truth is we have a fear that something will be taken away from us. Something will go wrong, that I'll lose my Social Security or I'll lose my job. One of the greatest fears years ago when I was growing up, of course, was divorce. You know, parents getting divorced and getting a job and things like that. But you know something, that changed. As I got older, then it was the Cold War, missiles in Cuba. Did I have a bomb shelter that I'd be safe in? Then after that came HIV, gangs, all these other things. As we grow older and spend more time, children and us learn, fears change. Fears change every year. So I want to take a look at this freedom from fear. Now, the first part is very negative, basically. Facts about fear. From all outward appearances, if you listen to it, we live in a world of fear. But our fears do change with the times. We worry about stock market now, health care, outsourcing, all these kinds of things. Why are you worried about it? If you know who you are, and we know who we are, that will not happen to you. You will find a job, you'll find something that can't be outsourced, which I think is amazing. Fear imprisons us. It keeps us from reaching our potential. When you're afraid, your whole system begins to shut down. You can't think. Everything shuts down. You're so worried about self-protection that you soon learn that if I stay away from it, I can't get hurt by it. I know you've heard me say this. I don't hate, that's a bad word. I have a lot of trouble with the, what is it they call Patriot Act. A lot of trouble with it. I hate going to the airport and being undressed. I figure it's nobody's business what kind of shorts I'm wearing. It just bothers me. It's another freedom that to me that is absolutely unnecessary. If everybody had the consciousness, nobody's going to bother me. I invite you all to fly on the same airplane I do. Because the first thing I do is step up to the pilot and I say, excuse me, you're carrying precious cargo back here, you keep it in the air. And he just looks at me like I'm an idiot. That's okay. He flies very well. They really do. I believe that I'm perfectly safe in the airport. There was a time I didn't feel like that, but I've overcome. I realize I can't be fearful of everything I do. Now, if you can get me on a roller coaster, that's another thing. I haven't overcome the roller coaster yet.